Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel.
This is Why Wasn't It Better, everyone, and I am your host, Patrick Darms.
I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
There's a familiar face with us today. Nathan Perry, welcome back to the pod.
Well, great to be here. And familiar voice, but I think it's the first time my face has been here. So
That's what I meant.
Very excited to have you. We are, seeing your visage for the first time. This is not handsome vision. This is just Nathan.
Yeah.
No filters used here on Why Wasn't It Better.
But pleasure to be here and pleasure to be talking about an interesting movie. Excited for a discussion on it.
It's going to be an exciting one, I think.
Uh-huh.
This is a sort of a new category that, Anton, we mentioned in our last episode when we covered Out of Africa. But Nathan, I'll catch you up to speed. Starting this season, we are covering some of the so-called worst films to win Best Picture. And Braveheart is allegedly one of those films. This movie's 30 years old.
Yeah, just about.
Yeah. I got to say, rewatching it could have been filmed today. Visually not dated at all.
I think the storytelling also has a really big part in that. It feels fresh, even 30 years later.
It does. It's weird how this is a 3-hour film and longer movies seem to be more of a thing now than they were in the 90s.
I think if we took an average of runtime for films in the 90s and now, I would say there's probably, I'm just going to go on a limb and say there's probably not much of a discrepancy because, what was it? Heck, Oppenheimer won and that film was like 5 hours long.
Yeah, I'm talking about blockbusters though. It seems like blockbusters seem to be getting longer now.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, there is just a quick, I was so curious by that question. Just a quick Google search says, it has been increasing over time. In 2001, the average length was 126 minutes, and 20 years later, it's at least 5 more minutes on average. And probably you were a bit closer to maybe like 2 hours solid or something like that before. So it's creeping up there. It may not be a huge jump, but it's creeping up there, which is interesting.
Hopefully it creeps back down because some of these movies that I've seen recently.
It's a lot. It can be a lot.
Can be a lot.
Why not split it into part 1 and part 2s? That's just more ticket sales, right?
They're doing it now.
They're doing it now.
They're doing it now a little bit, yeah.
Wicked, yes. Jeff Goldblum.
The newer Mission Impossible film is Dead Reckoning Part 1.
And no commitment on if it's only part 2.
It's called the Final Reckoning, which it doesn't really align with the Part 1, but...
Well, then Part 3 will be Final Reckoning Revenge.
Part 1.
Yeah. Well, you guys remember how they handled the final season of Attack on Titan?
Oh, yeah.
Part 1, Part 2, Part 3,
Part
4.
Okay.
They really, really milk that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. You get a lot of parts out of it.
I would love it if we could talk about a show like that, but it's not us right now.
No. And
plenty of movies to go through.
Right. And we have gotten that question before from listeners, like, are you ever going to cover some shows? And my answer to that was not anytime soon, just because of the obvious time requirement.
But hey, hit us up on Patreon and see what happens.
I'm glad you mentioned the Patreon, Anton. In regards to a little bit of admin, this is an opportunity we can remind people of our Patreon. Link is in the description. There's a couple different tiers if you're interested, but at the very least, you get access to ad-free episodes a whole week early.
Pretty sweet. I know that being able to interact with all of our listeners has been a joy. I love all the comments. So Patreon is just another one of those places where we can interact and also we appreciate all your support. So yeah, definitely check it out.
And of course, the elephant in the room, if you're listening to us on YouTube right now, you are watching us on YouTube right now. After a long time coming, we have finally made the jump and started recording our podcasts in video because the demand has just been there. There's people who they just want to see our faces and
clamoring for it.
Yeah, I don't know why, but apparently that's what the youth is. So
give the people what they want. I like it.
We do. Anyway, today's episode, we are talking about Braveheart. William
like it.
Wallace is a medieval Scottish patriot who is spurred into a revolt against the English when the love of his life is slaughtered. Leading his army into battles that become a war, his advance into England threatens Edward I's throne before he is captured and executed, but not before becoming a symbol for a free Scotland. I gotta say, I usually take these synopses from the first page of Google. This is not a good one. It's probably written by AI. Revolt against the English when the love of his life is slaughtered. It's like, that really the best way to phrase that? I don't know.
Yeah, when I read it here, I was a little like, oh, that's an interesting choice for language. Most of it is, it's got some awkward.
It's stuff that happens, but
I apologize. I should have picked a better
not
one.
Quite there.
Yeah.
So,
well, Braveheart was released on May 24th, 1995 by Icon Productions and the Ladd Company. It was distributed by Paramount Pictures and 20th Century Fox. Depending on which region you watch this film in, you will see the logos of either Paramount or Fox. It was directed by Mel Gibson. Screenplay was written by Randall Wallace, starring Mel Gibson, Sophie Marceau, Patrick McGowan, Catherine McCormick, Angus McFadden, Brendan Gleeson, David O'Hara, Ian Bannon, James Cosmo, Peter Hanley, and Brian Cox. The budget was $72 million. That is $148 million adjusted for inflation. And the box office was $209 million. That is $432 million adjusted for inflation. Nathan, as the guest for today, why did you want to talk about Braveheart?
Why did I want to talk about Braveheart? One, it's like my wife's favorite movie, so she was very excited to hear that it was on the list and wanted a good excuse to say, oh, we should watch Braveheart. So I knew that was definitely one of them. And two, it's a movie that I had only seen one time before, and it's certainly a film that I think when I was either like I knew about it for a long time, saw it, was kind of like, okay, this was a movie, that's cool, and thought it would be just a good one to kind of revisit and see where I'm feeling, 10, 15 years since the last time I saw it. So, and I know you guys obviously going over, this idea of worst best picture winners.
First of all, I love your reason. Solid.
Yeah, solid.
Your wife has great taste. That's an interesting choice for favorite movie. I like
or
it.
At least like one of favorite movies.
One.
So I don't know if she might. It's one of those things. Like me, given the day, might shift really between a top 3 or top 5. But certainly one of her favorites. She talks about it a lot. So
is another one on that list Finding Nemo?
Think it's as high as like maybe some other core Disney films like Beauty and the Beast and stuff like that.
That's fair. I was just curious.
Worst Best Picture winners. Yeah, this film is usually included on those lists. This got 10 Academy Award nominations. Yeah, won 5. Picture, director, sound, cinematography, and makeup.
And MTV Award for Hottest Kiss.
I can't remember the first time I saw this. Probably it was around the time of Gladiator, if I'm not mistaken, because I saw Gladiator in the theater when it came out in 2000. And then it was around the same time that I saw this film. I can't remember if I saw this before or after Gladiator. The reason I'm bringing up Gladiator is these two films are often compared to each other. Although I think they are in some ways different films. They both won Best Picture. So I think they're always going to be tied together for that reason. But yeah, Anton, this comes up for Worst Best Picture winners. On Rotten Tomatoes, this has the 98th lowest score of the 97 films that have won Best Picture.
Well, people are haters, I'll tell you that.
Some ways, yes.
Yes.
Is that critic scores or like what is the based on critics?
Critical score,
critical score. Okay.
USA Today has this ranked 63rd. Vulture has this ranked 79th. I thought it would be just a good idea to cover this, just
Films
solely because of that.
Films like this have kind of fallen out of favor.
They have, and it is curious because this has always been one of those films that really myself and everyone that I know thinks quite highly of this film. I think it's a classic. I always have. Now, it like you, Nathan, I had not seen this in a long time. Probably like something like 15 years. It had been a while. So there was a bunch of things that I had forgotten about this film. We mentioned it's 3 hours long. There's a lot in here. A lot of stuff happens in this film.
Yeah, it does go over quite a bit. And it's interesting for 3 hours of film. It's still at different points feels like it's going real fast. And I'm like, oh, I wouldn't mind slowing down for a second here, guys. We're just kind of doing it.
Yeah.
So,
and this film for me, length was one of the things that I definitely remember having seen it in like the early 2000s for the first time. I think that watching it now, because it's also been a long time since, I really appreciate the storytelling and the pacing. I think even before really knowing this film for within the critical lens, I knew it for being that VHS double set that sat on, I think it was like my great aunt's shelf. There was this film which had 2 VHSs, Titanic and The Sound of Music. So I always use that as my barometer for like, wow, that's a long film if you need 2 VHSs. I'm going to stick to Rugrats, thank you. So
Rugrats gets a lot of VHSs though, I think, if you really put all the seasons together.
Yeah. But I'm excited to dig in.
Let's get into the production history then.
So
today's podcast is brought to you by Scotch. Production history of Braveheart. Randall Wallace wrote the screenplay back in the late 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
The project was developed by producer Alan Ladd Jr., going back to his time at MGM. When the studio was undergoing significant management changes in 1993, Ladd left the studio and he took a handful of screenplays with him, one of which was Braveheart. At one point, Terry Gilliam was offered the chance to direct, but he declined. Thank goodness. He would have butchered this. This is not a Terry Gilliam kind of film. And I like Terry Gilliam, but...
Do you like Brazil?
I do. Do you?
Not everyone does. I like that film.
Yeah, I do quite a bit. That's on our list, Anton. We're covering that.
I like Brazil.
Yeah, cool movie.
Yeah, don't know if you need Braveheart Brazil.
No.
No.
Mel Gibson became familiar with this around the same time, and he was initially not interested, but he kept thinking about it and he decided to pursue it. And I have to say, as a sidebar that is relevant to this discussion, on the 4K copy of this film that I purchased, Gibson gives a director's commentary, and it's pretty interesting.
For the whole film?
The whole film.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Gives a
Gotta
lot
be
of
really
insight into
interesting.
how he approached different scenes. It's pretty insightful commentary from him.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's I know we were talking before recording about a director's cut. We may not get that, but at least you have this commentary for insight and stuff like that.
At first, he was only interested in directing it and allegedly wanted Brad Pitt to play William Wallace. Jason Patric was also considered. The Brad Pitt thing actually makes sense because the historical William Wallace was in his 20s at the time of the Scottish Rebellion. So I can see why Brad Pitt was wanted for the role at this time. Would have been really interesting to see Brad Pitt in this role.
Yeah, it's interesting in that you see kind of a very similar character type in his when he played Achilles, but
Yeah.
it is interesting also to see a lot of the complaints Mel Gibson's too old to play William Wallace.
That is one of the reasons why he was only interested in directing this at first.
Was because he would get to play, or he was originally not going to act and just direct.
Yeah, he
Right,
only wanted to
right.
direct it. He wasn't
Okay, got it.
interested in. He
Okay.
thought he was too old.
Yes.
Gibson
Yes.
and Ladd initially had difficulty raising financing. They eventually got enough financing for the film, with Paramount Pictures financing a third of the budget in exchange for North American distribution rights, and 20th Century Fox putting up the other 2/3 in exchange for the international rights. That's why I mentioned when I was introing the film, depending on which region you were watching this film in, you're either going to see the Paramount logo or the Fox logo. Us here in the States, we're always going to see Paramount. But here's really why he ended up starring in it. The studios only agreed to finance the picture after Gibson agreed to play Wallace himself. Makes sense. They wanted a star. They wanted a bankable star for this.
Yeah.
Anton,
Makes sense.
this is where it gets fun. Gibson asked Sean Connery to play Longshanks.
That'd have been so sick.
Obviously, Connery turned him down. Gibson credited Connery's pronunciation of the word goulash with helping him with the Scottish accent for the film. I had to fact check this, that this is not just some random IMDb quote. He says this in a interview on television.
Okay. So you found the interview and watched him say, "Oh, I talked with Sean Connery."
There's some things you read on IMDb trivia where you're like, I gotta fact check
I gotta
that.
source
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Because there's some questionable stuff on IMDb
Yeah,
trivia.
there was something about like Steven Spielberg gave birth to E.T. Like that's so weird. That can't be true, right?
That
that
can't
can't
be
be
true at all.
Tom Cruise wasn't really a samurai.
right?
Actually, he went and trained for like 5
He did.
years to become a samurai because he felt it was the only way to truly be authentic in that.
I know you're joking, Nathan, but for The Last Samurai, he really did do like a year and a half of sword training to prepare because he's Tom
Well,
Cruise.
Because he's Tom. That is, that's fair. He is
Yeah.
Tom Cruise.
He's
And
Tom
for-
The
Cruise.
guy, he's Tom Cruise, but he does. If he does a thing, he does a thing.
Yeah, he does
So-
his own stunts. He
Yeah.
went back in time that many times in Edge of Tomorrow.
It's true.
He does his own stunts and he wants you to know it.
Yeah, the thing about Tom Cruise doing his own stunts is everyone's aware because he makes it painfully aware that he does his own stunts. Anyway, so Goulash. So you
Yeah.
confirmed that. Great.
As entertaining as Connery would have been as Longshanks, I'm very good with McGowan.
I think he did that role very well. We'll get
Just-
there.
Oh, just wait. Oh, man, Patrick McGowan. Underrated actor after saying this. The original plan was to film everything in Scotland, but most of the shoot was actually done in Ireland after the Irish government offered 1,600 members of the Irish Army Reserves as extras. To lower costs, Gibson had the same extras portray both armies.
Controversial.
Just a bit.
Like, did they like have them and then like? I was curious when I read this before. Like, did they have them and put them like 800 here, 800 here? Did they? How'd they portray both armies?
Well,
I don't know.
he talks a bit about this in the commentary. I'm glad you asked, Nathan. Think about how many shots actually have 1,600 people in them. Not many. So all the shots of the actual battle, there's usually 300 to 400 people in the wide shots. So
Got it. Okay.
he was able to like rotate guys in.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty efficient.
Okay,
I
makes
mean,
sense.
I get it.
And that's okay. That's interesting. That it adds to the how they filmed it. Which there's a lot of interesting stuff. We'll get there. Let's keep going through.
For the battle scenes, basically, he filmed hours and hours of footage just for the battle scenes, and then took the best bits from it. Each of the two major battle scenes took weeks to film, which you would imagine.
Sure.
Principal photography took 100 days, lasting from June to October 1994. 12 weeks on location in Ireland with interior scenes at Ardmore Studios. That's in Ireland as well. Another 5 weeks on location in Scotland. Weather was a major obstacle for the production. It was cold and rained almost daily. Many of the shots were out of focus. The rain limited the use of artificial lights, providing additional challenges. Cinematographer John Toll spoke at length about, in a number of interviews, he spoke about, they're all well worth reading if you're into that stuff. And one of the quotes that really stood out to me, he said, quote, "It was because of the weather, really. It brought an incredible look to the film. It brought so much to the film, the fact that we were able to shoot in that weather, and especially for this story," end quote. Yeah, so a lot of what you see in the film is just lit with natural lights, which is pretty impressive.
Wow.
He won the Oscar for his work.
Yeah. Well, it shows.
Yeah, deserved.
That's definitely one of the major standout components of this.
I don't know if I remember to write it down later in the notes, but no coincidence, John Toll also shot The Last Samurai and The Thin Red Line. So it's like pretty amazing stuff from him. The original cut of this film was 4 hours. Gibson and his editor, Stephen Rosenblum, initially trimmed it down to 195 minutes, but Sherry Lansing, the head of Paramount at the time, requested that they cut the film down to just under 3 hours, which of course they did. Now, they had to tone down the battle scenes to avoid an NC-17 rating. Not surprised to read that. The final version of this film was rated R for, quote, brutal medieval warfare, end quote. And that is the most accurate MPAA description of a rating I've ever read.
It's got it.
Yeah.
That's definitely a thing in this movie.
Matter of fact, if anyone ever asks me, I haven't seen Braveheart. Pat, what's it like? I'm just going to say it has lots of brutal medieval warfare.
Yeah, this is not your run-of-the-mill reenactments out of the medieval fair. This is the real stuff.
Yeah.
Before we
Definitely.
started recording, I posed the question to the both of you, which I don't know how we could figure this out. And I want to ask ChatGPT, is this the most violent movie to ever win Best Picture? I think it has to be, right? Because you think
Let's
prior to like the 80s, this, like, something this violent would have no chance of winning Best Picture.
Right.
We're pretty familiar with films that have come out in the past 30 years. I think this is more violent than Gladiator by far.
There's only one other film that I could think of that has pretty brutal moments, and that's Silence of the Lambs. But even then, it's a bit more toned down.
I'm just looking over a list myself to remind me.
Schindler's List, maybe in a different, more horrible way.
So I haven't seen it, but because this is also maybe a difference of, like, there's definitely Braveheart, like, mass, and I was mentioning this before, like, mass brutality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, big fight scenes, a lot of, like, blood and guts, but I don't know if it is a contrast also of, like, the intensity or maybe the emotional impact of a lot of the violence.
Yeah.
The brutal torture scene at the end is brutal, but, like, I don't know, for example, like, if there's another film with, like, a really brutal torture scene or something that's maybe even more visceral or something, even though the rest of the film doesn't have, like, armies fighting each other very, like, visually. I don't know. Have to look at it.
I think it is.
Maybe-
I think it's the
maybe we
most
break it
violent
down.
movie. Let's just say it is.
Sure. Let's say
Sure.
it is.
It's official.
I'm
You
happy.
heard it here first.
Most violent movie.
So the score was composed and conducted by James Horner. It has gone on to become one of the most commercially successful soundtracks of all time. Let's hold all our thoughts on the score till later.
Okay. All right.
Both of you know how I feel about this.
You probably feel similarly, Bo. I get there.
Don't see how you couldn't. This has a 76% Rotten Tomatoes score. So apparently that's quite low for a film to win Best Picture.
It's the second greatest score to feature the Scottish Highlands.
What do you put as first?
Highlander.
Who composed that score?
Queen.
All right. That's it for the production history. Let's talk why wasn't it better. Number one, let's start with the historical inaccuracy. And I want to begin by asking you both a question. Does a so-called historical film need to be historically accurate to be considered good?
I agree. Doesn't need to be whatever historically accurate means.
You don't need
clear thing.
You can be
opinion.
inaccurate and still tell a good story. That's my statement there.
Sure.
Completely
Absolutely.
agree.
Now, if you want to score it that way and say, well, it's not true to a story, you can still have it be very true. Like, that could be a true statement and you can still have a good movie. But I don't think it should be a negative mark.
I think there are things in film that probably should be represented accurately.
There
There are sensitive subjects, I think, that you probably shouldn't mess with. And I don't necessarily know what's a lot of them are. I would put the Holocaust on that list.
Yeah, it's funny. As soon as you said it, I said, yeah, you don't want to embellish Schindler's List.
Right. Now, is that because it's far more recent than the Scottish Rebellion? Genocide should not be taken lightly. Now, there, of course, was genocide back then. The Roman Empire committed genocide, and, like, you know what I mean? There's plenty of historical inaccuracies about, like, for example, like Gladiator is not a historically accurate film at all. It's basically a fictional story. This basically is too, based on what we know about William Wallace, and a lot of what takes place in this film is not very accurate.
Right.
Public perception is so important when it comes to how well a film's going to do. So if one of the things that is really circulating is the film's inaccuracy, that's definitely negative publicity. And that'll really impact how people view the film. So I could see why it would be a complaint from people, but just thinking about it objectively, I don't think that it's necessarily like the worst reason why a film shouldn't be looked at favorably.
Yeah, I think there's also, and not only in that way, like there's certain sensitive subjects, but there's also a point at which what you're doing with your subject matter can also feel, for example, you can be so inaccurate because you're not bothering paying attention or trying to be historically grounded. You say something, but you're not actually showing any work, if you will, that it also starts to feel lazy or even like kind of why bother kind of thing. I don't know if I have an example that comes to mind, but you know, like if you're too loose with it and you're too loose with it for not a good reason, like that starts to be like, well, come on, guys, like, why did you need to change it because like budget reasons? Or did you change it because like we're playing in the space where we're not worried about being accurate, right? I think there can be a reason for why it's the inaccuracy is there that you can be judgmental towards, right? So I don't think it needs to be, quote, accurate to be good, but, when you're not, you got to be clear and careful about why you're not, I think, in some ways.
I think it's fine as long as the filmmakers are open about it. I think it becomes problematic when a film or any other work tries to pretend it is accurate when it's not.
Yeah.
Like, remember all the nonsense about the Da Vinci Code when that book and the film came out, and there was a lot of people that got fooled themselves into thinking that this was somehow real in a way. And I don't think the author did anything to dispel that notion, which didn't help.
Sure.
We can talk about that on our Da Vinci Code episode, Ant.
I don't know. I mean, also I think when I think about story structure objectively as well, like, what if it kind of comes down to as information changes, a story turns out to be not as true. Like, I'm thinking of The Blind Side. Like, a lot of people love that film, but took 20 years, and what do you know? Actually, a lot of it was pretty embellished. So
yeah, they didn't know that at the time, though.
And they didn't know that at the time.
Right.
So
right.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, now this film, I think there are probably a lot of people that have seen Braveheart and think it's completely true, which is, I mean, that's not the fault of this film, but
fair enough.
I think it is worth pointing out.
Yeah. The more, as you say that, I kind of think probably too, when I think about how many films are able to represent like different peoples and kind of be a hallmark for that culture. If a big film like this is coming out and then people are having their own perceptions of what Scottish culture and legacy is, that could probably be annoying to a lot of Scottish people.
It is. It definitely is.
It also is where I think the question of like historical inaccuracy, and maybe where you get certain films get a lot of finger pointing and a lot of other films don't, is things that aren't necessarily the film's fault, but public interest and kind of perception grows in a way where it's like, oh, it's really important, and we start referencing or attaching to a film in a particular way. And I think this is to Braveheart's credit, it is a emotionally resonant film that I think attracts a lot of people, and thus that it can kind of create something where maybe a film like Gladiator or one of these others doesn't quite get the same kind of like, oh, I'm now attached to like Scottish independence or something like that. Versus I'm thinking about like, oh, Roman, Rome, whatever. Even if it's like, and suddenly the noticing these inaccuracies are like kind of, anyway, that's kind of where I'm thinking, why does this one get more attention about inaccuracies than some other historically based films?
I have a theory on that at least part of it has to do with who starred in and directed it.
Yep.
Just because
haters,
the figure that he is, and we're going to talk about Mel Gibson. I mean, let's be honest, he hasn't done himself any favors with some of the things that he said over the years. Let's just leave it at that. A couple of things I want to mention though, in regards to the inaccuracies of this film. Braveheart has traditionally been the historical name for Robert the Bruce, who was a character in this film. And I think this film does a pretty good job of establishing that he really is the central figure in the war for Scottish independence around this time. It was not William Wallace. It was the Bruce. Now, the film does make this clear at the end when he is leading the Scottish rebellion against the English at Bannockburn. So it does clear that up. William Wallace was a noble. He was not a simple farmer. His father was not killed by the English. The big one, the thing that I noticed the most is prima nocta never existed at all in England. It was not a thing. Makes for a very evil villain, I'll say that. Prima nocta. Sexual rights. So funny how he says that. He really puts the emphasis on that word.
Your delivery of it was really...
Patrick McGowan was just milking it in that scene.
He just commanded attention in every scene he was in.
Do you think when they sent him the script, he read it and he was like, I am going to double my screen time.
I'm going to be the most recognizable figure here.
I'm going to drag out every word. Yeah, the whole thing about Wallace having an affair with the Queen completely never happened. She would have been a child at the time. She wasn't even in England at the time. So, Robert the Bruce did not betray him. The Irish did not really switch sides. The blue face paint, there's a lot of inaccuracies in this film. A lot of what you know about William Wallace is based on a poem. There's not a tremendous amount known about him.
Yeah, but I think about all of those changes, all of those historical inaccuracies, and man, it's all done for the sake of storytelling.
It is.
Yeah. And it's like a epic poem, right? That it was originally kind of where a lot of that comes from. You've got like a really kind of like ye old knights kind of tale thing for it. Yeah. And I think this fits with it, right? When you're creating a story that's trying to be resonant, right?
Yeah, it's already enough of a soap opera, and I feel like a lot of the elements that were added in just kind of add to that drama. And it really set it up well for the sequel. Did you guys ever see the sequel?
2019 Robert the Bruce, or are you referencing a different film?
No, The Patriot.
Oh.
The second anti-British film.
The second anti-British film. Did Mel Gibson do a trilogy of anti-British films?
Did he do a third one?
I was going to say, no. Was there a third one?
Was one of the bad guys in Lethal? No, they were South African.
Yes.
Diplomatic immunity.
That's the one. That's the one.
That's a fun movie. There's no pool here. This house is on bloody stilts.
Oh, Pat.
It's such a fun accent to mess with. South African. What were we saying about Braveheart?
So we were seeing there's a bunch of inaccuracies.
There's a whole bunch.
There's a whole bunch of inaccuracies, but do we need to hold the film to being historically accurate? As we said, the script is William Wallace. A lot of that is like legend built around like an epic poem that was written a century plus after he would have lived or something like that, I think, when I looked it up. So you're definitely pulling from something that maybe is more like King Arthur than in some ways than like,
right.
Kind of then, we got a really good biography on the guy, right?
Mm-hmm. This is what Gibson had to say about it, and I quite like it. Quote, "Some people said that in telling the story, we messed up history. It doesn't bother me because what I'm giving you is a cinematic experience. And I think films are there first to entertain, then teach, then inspire. There probably were historical inaccuracies, quite a few. But maybe there weren't. Who's to say?" Well, there were.
Yeah, well,
because there was very little history about the man. It wasn't necessarily authentic. In some of the stuff I read about him, he wasn't as nice as he was on film. We romanticized it a bit, but that's the language of film. You have to make it cinematically acceptable. Actually, he was a monster. He always smelled of smoke because he was always burning people's villages down. He was like what the Vikings called a berserker, but we kind of shifted the balance a bit because somebody's got to be the good guy and somebody the bad guy, and every story has its own point of view. That was our bias, end quote.
Yeah, I read the same quote, and he owns up to it, but then he also just kind of covers up a little bit.
Maybe there were inaccuracies. Maybe there weren't.
Maybe, maybe we puffed him up a little bit. Oh, actually, he was terrible. Like, okay, all right. Okay, Gibson.
Maybe he was really the father of Isabella's daughter. Maybe he wasn't. It's like...
So all that said, I get it. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, I think, as you were saying earlier, of actually what I find really interesting from that quote is the end, where at least it kind of gets into maybe Gibson's mindset when he's directing and writing, is someone's got to be the good guy and someone's got to be the bad guy. And you got to have these spaces and you got to have this kind of clear contrast, which I think is interesting to see because that's clearly in this film. It's like you get almost like the most black and white possible. Like,
it is a very one-dimensional good versus evil story. Like the good guy is very good and the bad guy is very evil in this film.
Well, I'd argue this though. If it was that simple, I think a lot more directors could be getting it right. I think he makes it very entertaining.
I think the story's simple. Yeah. I think the execution of this film was I agree with you.
I think that's to the credit. And that's where I think one thing that you said before of like where I kind of in a way don't feel this is like a very modern movie, because I think like so many movies want to try to do the like really invest in like the gray space. I feel like a lot more, in a way, as a comment, I don't know if this is the right spot. Maybe we leave it for later. But I was thinking of actually like, oh, William Wallace, straight arrow, kind of like, this is it. This is how I think. And like cut away to like Robert the Bruce and him talking with his dad. And I was like, oh, this is like the Game of Thrones sides of thing, right? This is like actually where if it was made today, you'd be investing way more in this than in over in like the William Wallace side or something like that, which it was something I was thinking about because I feel like that's where a lot of storytelling and audience, maybe expectation has moved, where this felt different in that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree with you, and I should have clarified that. The storytelling, I think some parts of it are of that era.
Mm-hmm.
I think visually is where this film is completely timeless and holds up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we can get there for sure.
In some ways, it looks a lot better than stuff that I'm seeing now, which we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But getting into the next reason, which is Mel Gibson,
Mm-hmm.
he's always going to be tainted by the stuff that he said publicly years later, right? Like it's very difficult to separate that stuff from him.
Sure.
I try to when I'm analyzing these films.
Yeah, and it is a bit uncomfortable, but there's no doubt that it's because of his history that people are judging him a bit more. There's a bit more scrutiny on his older films.
I had forgotten how awesome of an actor he can be when I was rewatching this. I don't know about how good of a dramatic actor he is. I think he's a good dramatic actor.
I think he's solid. Like in terms of his contemporaries, he was able to kind of fit into dramatic roles, action roles, comedic roles pretty well. I'd say that I wouldn't necessarily say he was the best other than when he was in an action role. But I do think that he was a very popular actor to put in a variety of roles, especially in his heyday.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised to read that he was not nominated for Best Actor for this. I think if he had been, it would have been deserved because some of the stuff he does in this movie, I don't think there are many actors that could have pulled it off. All the stuff he's doing in that revenge scene, I mean, the physical stuff he excels at.
Sure.
You totally buy that he can beat the shit out of a bunch of people and kill a bunch of people. He totally sells that. The look on his face during the revenge scene, he is so filled with rage he can't even speak. First of all, I think it's good directing from himself because was that the sheriff that he executes? Some local English.
I think what was the title? It was like sheriff
magistrate or something like that.
Something.
You know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, something like that.
His expression when he finally kills him is so good. He has nothing to say to him. Like, he gets his revenge, but he feels nothing. It's completely empty, the look on his face. I don't think there are many actors that could have pulled that whole scene off.
I agree. I think that is a standout scene from him. I think where maybe he loses it is because I think there's more than a couple other scenes in the film that are just not as strong or consistent. And that's maybe kind of the hard part with Gibson is kind of consistency. Because I felt like plenty of other times, I'm trying to think of just little bits in terms of how he acts, maybe in some other spaces, especially maybe in more talky scenes where he kind of doesn't. There's a couple spaces where I think it's good, but like, again, I think the physicality and I think the emotion around the revenge scene at the beginning really works well. And I think if it was based on a single scene, I think that would work.
I can see what you mean, where he holds his dialogue in this film versus how other actors hold dialogue for longer periods of time. You can lose yourself in other scenes versus with Mel Gibson, sometimes it's a little too over the top or feels a little drifty.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of, I was very curious watching the film because there's more than a couple scenes where he's doing stuff, but he's not talking. And I'm wondering if that's a choice by him, because also directing and starring is a complex role, and it might just be let me just simplify this so that I don't have to think about it as much, or that I get to kind of just be in that space. But I think the physical acting is really where he does so well, right? Because he can express a lot. He can express a lot, especially with his eyes. You can express all
So he,
his eyes.
so look, he really sold it during that pump up scene, right? That
Mhm.
the really famous speech.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
feel like, that showed me, he knows how to command a scene. It was shot very well.
Mhm.
You can see that inspiring so many similar scenes now, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Did
see,
you continue? Sorry.
I was gonna say,
Anthony.
like, look, you could look at even like the like Lord of the Rings, for example, like even visually
Mhm.
looking at shots like that.
Yeah.
But I do think, like you said, it's the consistency aspect. But even then, I don't think it was a bad performance from him. I think he just,
No,
yeah,
I don't think it was a bad performance from him at all. Like at all. He didn't like. There. I think for me, again, I'm not as fun. I'll say I'm not as familiar with his library of acting. I think sometimes he stood out from the rest of the cast as well, maybe a little too much, just because he is a distinct one. He's very distinct visually, tall, giant mullet, just giant flowing locks. And I think that's one thing for me where I would, as a kind of as I'm didn't quite fully, I think many scenes when he's physically acting. And like, I think the speech is great. The speech scene, I wasn't sure if either of you guys had this in your notes. I think it was something my wife actually was telling me about, is that the horse, when he's doing in that scene, in that sequence, was just really not staying still. That was not an intentional thing. That was like, he was just reacting to he was just rolling with the fact that the horse he was on was just refusing to stay still. So a lot of the energy and movement that's happening in that sequence, and I would imagine probably rolling even into the scene right after, which I really like, when he's like goes up with the other Scotsman to do like whatever the reading of terms, and he's just like prowling around the English guys and like kind of like, getting all up on them. I'm wondering, like, that's him like rolling with the horse's physicality. And I think, again, is a great directional choice where he gets to play into the physicality space. Because when he's moving, that's like always a help, I feel like.
So what you're saying, when the horse was a bit too riled up, they actually did stab that horse in that scene?
Maybe. I
Maybe.
don't know. That was actually a wholly different thing, which is how do you get a horse to fall on the ground in filmmaking?
What
I
is
don't know.
it? It's like in Hollywood, they just paint cows brown, and that's how you get a horse on screen, right?
They got investigated by like PETA.
For this movie?
Oh yeah.
They're
Oh,
like,
wow.
there's
Because
no way
the
you can.
mechanical horses that they used were so convincing that people thought they actually like killed horses on film. I mean,
Oh, wow.
they do look convincing when all the horses are getting stabbed.
Yeah, well, it's like, how did they do it? What's the movie magic on how they did
No.
that? Anyway,
It
no,
was
we're
just-
off.
just
we're off
giant
from Mel Gibson.
mechanical horses.
They painted cows brown and then stabbed the cow.
Angus beef.
Anyway, back to Mel Gibson.
I mean, not really surprising he won Best Director for this.
Mm-hmm.
It was only his second film as a director, but it was really his first big budget one. It was his first attempt at directing action. I'd say he did rather well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, excellent. I mean, any combat, action sequence, I think, great.
Yep.
Especially, again, so impressive. Also being a star in so many, especially.
It's hard to do. It really is.
Because you don't get to watch as you're doing it. You're like, here's what I'm going to set up, and I'm going to go over there and be in it, and going to run back and do that. And it's really impressive. Like, I don't fault like anything for that. Like, because it's just really, I can't imagine most directors would not be able to star in their own movie as well.
Not just good action scenes. I mean, some of the most famous set pieces from that era of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I took away from the commentary is he was, you'll like this. He said he learned a lot about directing action from George Miller on the Mad Max series. And he got the idea from Miller, which I don't know if I necessarily would have noticed it if he hadn't said it. But now that I was, rewatching the film again, it stood out to me. It's very, very effective. He would speed up or even remove a couple of frames here and there during the action sequences to give everything this like frenetic quality.
Yeah.
Really effective.
That's really interesting.
And you see that still in the Mad Max films that Miller's released recently.
Yes. This is an exceptionally well-directed film. And again, just to go back to it, like, there's no CGI used. So everything
Yeah.
you're seeing during those huge battle sequences is all practical.
Mhm.
And he was basically a rookie doing it. I don't want to say he doesn't get enough credit for it, but obviously he won an Academy Award for it, so he did.
Yes.
But just looking back at it like 30 years later, it's like how many directors could have done this well with this kind of film on what was basically their first attempt at directing action? It's like not many.
Yeah, but it all does kind of boil down to people don't really want to acknowledge his success considering his...
Right. Look, the guy's an asshole. We can say it. Not controversial to say it. He said a lot of like just deplorable stuff, but he knows how to make a movie.
I was gonna say, but the dude is actually still in Hollywood now. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like it's fine. He directed
He's still around. Yeah.
Hacksaw Ridge, and
Yeah.
that killed it.
Right.
Is he directing something
There's
soon?
apparently he's making a sequel to The Passion, but he's been trying to do that for a while. I don't know how realistic that is. I hope it is, but
Yeah, I think I was trying to look that up the other day and didn't see a whole lot from it. So maybe I was trying to see if he's directing something. I think he's directing something. I think he also is doing a lot with Mark Wahlberg these days. So I think he's supposed to be directing something with him.
That makes sense. Two Catholic boys, like
Two
Right.
Catholic
Kicking
boys. Yeah.
last
go.
bit about the direction of this film. I mentioned this briefly, I think towards the beginning of the recording. And this is giving credit for this. This film is 3 hours long. I didn't feel that there was any bloat whatsoever. It's pretty tight. It's really well paced.
Yeah. I would say, if anything, I do want to see that like 4-hour cut because I feel like more than a couple times they kind of rushed through a thing. And I can see how that's probably not what the intention was from a directorial like standpoint, but instead, all right, let me just cut this down. Let me see how I can keep this moving. So I'm curious, did he do the editing as well? I mean, he must have done the edit. You said that he's the one who actually figured out how to cut it down. So
Officially, I mean, he did not officially edit the film. It was done by an editor, but I mean, he was
got it.
very much involved.
it's for someone that's very hands-on. Like it's really impressive to see a director with just very concrete vision and execution.
Yeah, I think what works for the pacing too is none of the subplots really sneak up on you. Every single one is established. His romance with Murrin is established. Do you guys remember at what point she gets killed?
She gets killed before. I mean, what do you mean at what point?
What minute?
Timestamp?
Yeah.
25,
Yeah,
something like that. It's got to be in the first fifth of the
like
movie.
40 minutes in maybe.
It's almost an hour into the film.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
What?
it's established well.
What?
Yeah.
An hour into the movie? Man,
Almost,
it feels
A third of the movie.
it feels like that happens really early.
It does, but like that's what I mean. So much happens in this movie, and it is moving at a good pace. It's one of the better films that I've seen, considering the runtime and just in terms of the pacing. Anton, this is again. I think I talked about this. What episode was I talking about this on with you and Gary? I was talking about Avengers: Infinity War. How that is one of the best paced 3-hour films I've ever seen.
Yeah, I remember you mentioned that. It's just I can't remember what film we were talking about.
I'm putting Braveheart on that list too.
And that has like 4 times the amount of characters as this movie. So
Yeah.
it kind of makes it easier there because you're just like, oh, let me swap to a different set of characters.
It makes it easier, but it could have gone so wrong.
Sure, it's a different balance, right?
Yeah.
I think it's very impressive to have a long movie with a smaller cat, to me at least, because it's like, how do you keep that without being like, these people have talked already, these people have done this already, where are we going with this? No, I think it really is very well done. And I think it hits especially so many great emotional beats. I think like one that I think maybe not as one of the first two, one of the ones that people go to first, but I think comes at the perfect time in the pacing of the film to kind of re-energize it, is the Bruce's betrayal reveal when Wallace beats him, grabs him, pulls the helmet off, and you see it's the Bruce. I actually think that's a really great moment to inject right back into the film at that point. And I think I give as a small example, people will point to, the speech, the revenge sequence. That's one that just enables the film to continue with its pace. and continue moving with, like, let's reuse the characters. Let's keep all of the relationships moving to keep the pace going forward.
I think that's a good segue into the next reason, which is the production. You mentioned the emotions in this film, Nathan. I have written down soundtrack, action, emotion, acting, cinematography. There's some gut punches in this movie.
Yeah.
Quick sidebar, back to the 4K thing. This is an incredible film to watch with a good sound system.
Oh,
Just
can we talk
Yeah.
about, when are we at the point that we're allowed to talk about the soundtrack, or are we still
Almost.
Okay.
Oh, God,
all right.
we're just waiting. Oh my God.
Yeah,
Just what were you gonna say, Anton? Just
I was gonna say 1995. It doesn't feel like a film from 1995. Okay,
no.
right? Because there's a lot of films from 1995 that feel like they were released in 1973 or
You're right.
look like they were just hot off the press of 1980. I'm looking at you, Judge Dredd.
Even look, I have a soft spot for Batman Forever, but it's like, yeesh. Well, 1995 is an interesting point in film because you're at kind of CGI is in its early days, right? So if it's handled correctly, it can look fine still. Talking about the sound mixing that they had in 1995 is not that different than what they have now. Dolby 5.1 was pretty ubiquitous in film then, and that's still state of the art, right? For any sound system that you have. I'll give George Lucas credit for that. He had he very famously had the original trilogy mixed in 5.1 because he said, like, years from now, this will be standard in everyone's homes, and like pretty great foresight.
Yeah.
Anything mixed in 5.1 will still sound good like 50 years from now if people are watching it, unless they invent something we don't have right now. But that type of setup, it's just been around for like 40 years and it still sounds great.
Yeah. 50, 40, 50.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it just goes to show what kinds of things in film gets figured out early, even unexpectedly, and what kind of the other spaces they go into. So it's amazing that we get to have the same incredible sound today.
You really know, you don't just notice it in the battle scenes too. It's everything. The battle scenes are some of the best in all of cinema, I think. I don't think that's hyperbole to say this.
Yeah, and nothing really to distract from that, like amazing lighting or usage of just the natural lighting to really let the scene speak for themselves, and at the same time balance it out with sound mixing and just cinematography that just captures such a well balance. It's very impressive.
It's great. I think this is also maybe a little bit of a contrast. Maybe we're seeing a change with it with modern film, but I think a contrast with a lot of stuff over the last 30 years is how bright and readable this film is, which I think is, but not like cheap or something like that. I think is just goes to some of the amazing, like, I think, and that goes to where they filmed, but also how they filmed it. I think going back to, I think it was John Pohl's quote that you had earlier above, like the weather unexpectedly just helped create this amazing natural lighting where everything just could stand out. And I think that's so awesome because I think it fits so well the film to be bright. And I think it just works so well.
He deservedly won Best Cinematography. This is one of the best filmed movies I've ever seen.
Yeah. Oh, it's definitely just is really, again, all the visuals and the way it's filmed, just amazing. Yeah. Oh, I think it's fantastic. And, also, yeah, just what they, especially the different types of scenes and sequences that were filmed here, right? It's not just one kind of like dialogue shot or something like that, but you get big open shots, smaller one, smallers. You even have some really interesting, I think, in this mixture of both directing and cinematography, also to help kind of add to how you shoot different scenes and sequences, and I think it just has both broad scope and like smaller, and just works so well.
He said on the commentary he didn't have to give Toll much in the way of instruction. Not really surprising. That's why he hired him.
Probably also a great choice and a sign of a good director is to know where you're like, let me get the person who I don't need to give a lot of direction to because I know they're going to do a good job with it.
John Toll won back-to-back Oscars for Legends of the Fall and this. I don't know if a cinematographer... I think Roger Deakins might have done that recently with 1917 and Blade Runner 2049, I think.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah, but that hasn't happened often, if at all, except for those two gentlemen. Yeah, I was trying to write down just how awesome the cinematography is. I don't know if we need to say anything else about it. It's unreal how well filmed this is. So he won. Someone didn't, though, who should have. And it's time we can talk about the score. Top 5 score all time?
It is so impactful. It's amazing how well it just completely ties together this film.
Yeah, absolutely. Standout.
James
Standout
Horner's
score.
best work, would you say?
Man, it is
Mr.
just
Titanic?
Yeah.
I'm going with this for sure. I'm all in for the Braveheart score.
I don't get chills often listening to film scores. I do with this one. There's just some scenes where the music is so unbelievably beautiful, and yet it never dominates the film the way some movies are overscored. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah.
It's perfectly woven into the movie. It's like a character in the movie. It's driving every scene that the score is in. And it's embarrassing this didn't win Best Original Score. Like this is the Academy Awards should be ashamed of themselves for not giving him the Oscar for this.
Well, it's why we always say the Academy doesn't always get it right, and we can only know the campaigning behind the scenes here.
I put it in the notes sign. This is going to spoil it for you. Like, did you see what won?
That does not make sense.
I've never seen. I don't know what that movie is.
I actually have seen it in Italian class in high school. It's a pretty good movie.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think like it's just kind of comes down to an underappreciation of how good this is.
This is even funnier. He got 2 Oscar nominations for score and didn't win. He also got nominated for Apollo 13. Didn't win.
Haters.
Is it one of those things? You got enough nominations. We can't give it to you because it's just not fair.
I mean, he only won for his work on Titanic, for score and the song which he composed. He was nominated a lot. I think I'm with you, Nathan. Like, if there's one thing he should be remembered for, like, it's James Horner. Like, it's Braveheart. It's interesting you picked this over Titanic. He does not do Titanic if he didn't do Braveheart, because he and Cameron hated each other after working together on Aliens, and the reason why Cameron wanted him to score Titanic is he heard Braveheart.
I can only imagine that conversation. Cameron they're over a table, just points at him like, I need you for this, you son of a bitch.
That's pretty much what happened. But again, another mark of a great director. He's like, should probably get this guy to score my film, even though I don't like it.
Even though at least we can be professional about it and make it happen. And they made it happen. I don't know. I think Titanic did pretty well.
Pretty well, yeah.
Yeah, I think it did pretty well in terms of the score, right?
Yeah, that's a hot movie.
I believe that's the best-selling orchestral soundtrack of all time, which not surprising.
Not surprising.
No. So the main theme to this, For Love of a Princess, super famous.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The track, The Princess Pleads for Wallace's Life, that was on my wife and I's wedding playlist.
Aww.
That's sweet.
That is the track that plays exactly what it sounds like, where she's asking Longshanks to spare him. Very subtle.
At the end, towards the end.
Right before the execution. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. Anton, before I forget, I don't know if I wrote this down either. This not winning for score at the Oscars, I would put right up there with like Pacino not winning for Godfather 2. Like this, it's absurd.
Yep, that's a really good call.
You were mentioning the emotions in this film. That is one of the things I had forgotten. And rewatching this the other day, it gave me a flashback of the first time I saw this with my dad. Because when you're watching this for the first time, especially if you're a kid, when he is trying to save Murron, right? You're like, oh, he's gonna save her. That's one of the biggest shocks I've ever experienced watching a movie. When she gets killed, when she's murdered, that is like a sledgehammer hitting you emotionally.
Yeah, I think even to add on to that, I think it's also not just that, but the fact that it like doesn't happen like in front of him, or like he almost got there and then failed at the last second, but it's done very separately. And you're like, well, that's not going to happen right now, at least. It has to at least happen when it make sense for the dramatic reveal of the script the way you would think it would happen. But nope, it's like done. And I think that that's actually one of those spaces where from a story like writing for sometimes where the film runs a little bit kind of, as we said, really maybe a little bit standard. Like, I think that's a really interesting choice. Standard from like a writing, like, oh, that's, you know, kind of we did the usual thing. I think that really stands out as being a really interesting choice and really does get you. Because you're like, I didn't see that coming right there. Like right there at that moment. Even if you're like, oh, that's going to not go well, it's like you're not expecting in that space. Yeah.
There's not many films that would have the guts to do it.
Yeah, it's a probably when I think of the formula of like how you do that, you named a few more, I think, popular tropes of how it would probably be displayed for other films, but I think that there's a bit of a gut punch if it's too late.
Yeah,
and I don't think you don't see that too often.
All of how it happens doesn't feel like a cliche. Like I think I mentioned this earlier, when he gets his quote unquote revenge and he kills the magistrate, he doesn't say anything to him. A lot of movies would have had some like badass corny line,
one-liner. Yeah,
doesn't say anything to him, and you can see all the emotion on his face. It's like I said, he feels nothing. He gets his revenge, but it's, what is it for? What does it mean? It's completely unsatisfying to him, like it probably would be in real life. What would it actually accomplish? It doesn't make him feel better. There's a lot of little other bits in the film too. I've forgotten the most effective scene for me rewatching this the other night was the dream that he has of her. I thought it was the saddest part of the film when he sees her in the forest. I didn't remember that scene at all. I thought it was really powerful when the way he knelt in front of her.
Yeah.
And she tells him, "You're dreaming, you have to wake up." And he's like, "I don't want to wake."
I think,
didn't come off as too sappy, which says a lot.
I think actually also adding, that was one thing I walked away with, is like, I really liked every dream sequence. Like, I know there's not a lot of them. That's where I'm also curious about this 4-hour edit, if there's like one or two extra dream sequences that didn't make it. Because I also liked the one, speaking of, from the beginning of the movie, when he's like a kid and they have this like really interesting scene when he's like sees his dad like dead on the table, and his dad like turns to him and like talks to him. It's just super interesting, actually, these like dream sequences in this film. And I think I would have loved like a third one to kind of like complete it or something, to add a little bit. I thought that was like, oh wow, this is a really imaginative space within a film that, you know, has so much great execution and seems to be doing something in this space. Yeah, that's like one of those, like, I'm really curious if there's like a missing one to kind of help kind of bring some things together. You could maybe say the execution scene at the end when he sees her again is adding to that, but I think
so effective when he sees her in the crowd.
Yeah, they don't entirely delve into it, but it builds a bit of magical realism, right? But it also feels like Shakespearean storytelling.
It's just so effective. Like I said, he doesn't overdo it. I would imagine there's at least one other dream sequence in that 4-hour cut. You would have to.
Probably more butts.
Feel like it, and I feel like, and maybe it just, after editing and everything, it wasn't quite clicking or something. But I feel like I really wanted one more that like kind of added to that space, because I feel like it in some ways is actually one of the best spaces where you explore Wallace dealing with complexity of feeling, you know,
or internal struggle,
because outwardly he doesn't seem to really have that going on very much. He's pretty like, I got my thing, I'm doing it, I'm executing on it. But those dream sequences are where you get that space, and that's kind of why I want like a little bit more of it to be in that. So I think they were like really well done.
There's one scene that when you first are watching it, it's where he's hunting in the woods and he almost gets assassinated. It starts off like a dream. At least it did to me, where you see the deer and everything, and then it obviously is not a dream, but an equally effective scene. The way it's filmed, really good use of slow motion in this film. It doesn't, again, to borrow something you said about the dreams, Anton, the slow motion in this film, there's quite a bit of it, and none of it feels cheesy. It's time to talk about Patrick McGowan.
Let's do it.
One of the most underrated movie villains of all time, Edward the Longshanks, legendary asshole, robbed of an Oscar nomination.
There's a likability to his deviousness.
It's so
almost.
entertaining.
He
I
is.
was waiting for this in the director's commentary, and Gibson didn't say anything explicitly because I am very curious rewatching this movie. Like, are they deliberately trying to make him funny? Because he's hilarious.
I don't think so. I understand where you're coming from. I don't think so. I think it's an kind of unintentional thing. Is my take on it. I think it's because I think it's skirting. I think it's skirting the line, and I wonder if it's also a little bit of like either like a taste or like a kind of space. But I don't think it's intentionally trying to make a funny character, despite having some just banger lines.
Who is
Like,
this
just
person who
like-
speaks to me as though I needed his advice?
I think that I do think that there was an intention to be comedic, because I feel like there is a bit of dry humor. Like, there's just so much, it comes off with an execution of dry humor. And I say this because I'm reminded of other great actors. I mean, Brian Cox was in this film, and I really am reminded of like someone like Logan Roy, who delivers like a fantastic line that can be menacing but hilarious at the same time. And I see that a lot in this character. I don't know if is it just me finding it funny when he threw that dude out the window?
Oh, it's funny. No, it's funny.
Yeah.
The way the guards just look up and run away.
And then there's just a body on the floor. Like I said, it felt like Monty Python, but at the same time.
Well, what Gibson did say in the commentary, which is this is true about the real historical Longshanks, is he was described by many of his contemporaries as extremely intimidating. He got his nickname because of how tall he was. He was about 6'2", 6'3", which back then he would have towered over most people. That's tall now, obviously, but almost 800 years ago, that would have been abnormally tall. And the sarcasm that he has on display in this movie is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. His performance is probably my favorite thing about the film. I had forgotten how entertaining McGowan is in this role.
It is, and very consistent, right?
Oh yeah, trolling people the whole time.
Yeah, I do. One thing that's maybe not what I think we think of all the great lines and just his sarcasm, his kind of commentary. I also want to highlight, I think he plays getting sick and declining at the end of this film extremely well. Because I can't imagine, I don't know what it takes really to act like a cough and then kind of declining into that space. So I know it's not the thing that you remember as well, but I think, also props there. That is not an easy thing to act through as well. And I think it gives that kind of, it's not just, he delivers a great sarcastic line. I think he also has that clearly dramatic delivery as well.
This feeds into what I said earlier. All of the subplots in this film are established, and none of them sneak up on you, including him getting sick. Because he starts coughing. I think the cough starts in the scene where he throws his son's lover out the window. When he sits down. Also, my favorite thing about that whole scene, he's completely unfazed by his son trying to stab him.
Right.
He just backhands him, kicks him, picks up the knife, and starts talking to himself and sits down. I think that's when he starts coughing. But yeah, I don't think he goes over the top with it, as entertaining as it is. It's kind of a nuanced performance because he's completely ruthless, but it also establishes in the first scene, he's no dummy. He's pretty canny.
Right. I think that goes well. And it is really interesting how the film continually also keeps, it's not where the film is that interested in, even though it clearly has repercussions, but he's like, I'm actually really distracted with all of this stuff in France. That's where I really want to be. I'm doing all this shit in France, but I keep having to come here to deal with these damn Scots. Come on, someone figure this out for me. Why am I here? I should be in France dealing with real serious stuff. And I think there's an interesting thing about where, we're not fixating on that component, but it's it's being brought in and kind of is being there. And I think adds to the I'm actually a big deal, and I'm getting stuck dealing with small potatoes right now, right? Kind of thing. And I think that is interesting for the character, and where you see he's really competent, right? It's he just needs to, he's man, everyone around me is incompetent. I have to go deal with everything. And when he starts dealing with things, he kind of kind of gets stuff done,
So
for better or for worse.
After he throws the guy out the window, you remember he sits down and he starts monologuing to himself. He's like, "Who will I send? Not I." He's like, "Not my gentle son. The mere sight of him might encourage the enemy to take over the whole country."
Right.
Like it's he's clearly just knows that's coming off as hilarious.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I wonder about. Like, they had to know this would be slightly funny. All of it, like all the stuff he says during the one battle is just outstanding. Arrows cost money. Send the Irish. The dead cost nothing. And then I think the funniest one is, "But sire, won't we hit our own men?" He's like, "Well, we'll hit theirs too. We'll hit theirs as well." And then he's like, "Bring me Wallace, alive if possible. Dead, just as good."
That is pretty funny because it's
The most sarcastic line, though. Did you guys catch this when he's talking about sending the princess to deal with Wallace? And the one guy's like, "But what if the princess gets taken hostage?" He's like, "Oh, my son would be distressed by that."
yes.
He says this a couple times to people where they compliment him, like, "Oh, most excellent idea. Sorry, is it? Are they?" What does he say? What does his son say? He's like, "I've appointed him my new, like,
High counselor."
and he's like, "Is he qualified?"
Right.
So great.
I'm
Should have been
educated
nominated
in
for an
war.
Oscar. It's so great.
It is a extremely memorable performance, and I think it fits very well in the movie that was that the vision for the movie.
He was a legit badass in real life. I know a bit about Longshanks, the historical figure. He's one of the more significant of the English kings from that era. He may have been brutal, but he was a gifted battlefield commander, very good with strategy, which I think this film does a pretty good job of establishing how he's thinking. He's trying to stay a couple steps ahead of Wallace's rebellion the whole time, and he pretty much does for the most part. He outthinks them in a couple different ways. I don't know if either of you know this, but you guys played Assassin's Creed.
Sure. I've played an Assassin's Creed.
You know, it was a real organization. So the real Longshanks survived an assassination attempt by one of them in Acre during the Crusades. He killed the assassin with his own hands.
Wow.
Impressive.
Was he a Templar? Is that one?
I don't know if I don't know. He wouldn't. No.
That's video game thing. It's
Right.
the Assassins versus the Templars.
He was not a real life historical Templar. I know that. And just in case, one thing this film did not get wrong was his absolute hatred of Scotland. And on his sarcophagus, it is transcribed with the nickname Hammer of the Scots.
Real player hater.
That's definitely accurate.
He walked the
I
walk.
understand.
As they say, God wills it.
Right. Does he? I have to figure out a way to use that line in real life. Who is this person who speaks to me as though I needed his advice? That's just wonderful dialogue. It is worth pointing out the film's portrayal of his son, Edward II, received criticism for being homophobic.
Yeah, fair.
It was the 90s.
It was the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, they wouldn't. It's just that is an example of something in the film that you probably would not see now.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's going past the studio or whatever screening testing.
Any other standouts for you in the cast?
Gleason for sure.
I really liked Angus McFadden a lot. I might say, in some ways, he might be my favorite performance, or maybe my favorite character. Largely because I think he has some real internal struggle and conflict, and that's actually getting depicted. And I like to see his kind of growth and conflict. Whereas I think a lot of the other, you don't get as much. I mean, I think he has the most, character development in the film, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think he does great. I think he does great, and I'm glad that he's here in this role, because one thing is, I don't think if Braveheart's made today, you're putting a guy, and I mean this in the, I don't think you're putting him in that role if you're doing this today, because you're going to put Chris Pine or whomever in Outlaw in the sense of I think you're also going to pick a big, handsome, muscular guy for this role because that's just who you have to put in. I'm not saying trying to hate on I think he does a great acting job in it, and I think he fits it so well. But I think you're also gonna be putting someone else, like a Hollywood type, into this.
Yep.
Into this role. But I think he just does such a great job of really being like, what am I? Am I just kind of a guy trying to do the politics, but I'm inspired by something. I love even just towards the end of the movie when it's clear he's had a change of heart, but then Wallace gets captured and betrayed. While he's waiting for Wallace, he's like walking on the table, and I really like that. If you don't remember it, it's just funny because he's like showing some almost like excited childlike energy, which I think reflects the character's newfound, like, this is what I'm doing. I'm excited by this. I'm changing what I'm going to do. And I think that just comes across the scene when he like betrays Wallace. Like, I think you just see it on his face.
It's
so
phenomenal acting.
I think he is a great actor. It just does amazing in this role. So
he was the other surprise for me. I had forgotten how good he is in this role. You're right. I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah.
The scenes with his have you forgotten about all that stuff, Anton? Because I did.
It's been, I had totally forgotten, or at least and I just appreciate, again, the emotional impact, I feel like.
When he tells him, my hate will die with you, it's great. And very difficult role to pull off for McFadden, because you have to hate him when he betrays Wallace, and then you have to be with him for his redemption at the end.
Right. Get back on and get with him. I don't hate him at his betrayal of Wallace. I'm just disappointed.
That's what I mean.
I think that's the emotion that clearly they're going for, because that's Wallace is also, I'm so disappointed, right? And he's disappointed with himself. And it just feels so disappointing. And I think that's where I was talking with my wife about the very last scene, because she was saying, I'm not quite sure if I need like it to feel for a little bit like the Bruce is going to like he's going to follow through and, kiss England's ring. And I'm like, I think it actually is there to do that very thing for you to feel like, we're going to be disappointed in this guy again, who we're always disappointed.
No, I agree. I think you need it. You
need it, because it's then when he's like turns around and is like, nah, we're doing it. We're doing it, boys.
Well,
and
you need it. Like, you need it because he's the narrator of the film.
Right.
You almost forget it, because I think his narration drops off pretty early.
I forgot it.
Right.
It didn't really click for me.
Really, when it comes back in at the end, everything comes together. That's what I mean about all the subplots being established early on and being there throughout. Even his father, the leper, right, the senior Bruce, he is even slightly sympathetic. Even
he's the most sympathetic, antagonist, because at least he gives voice to something that isn't just, we're doing this. Even when he's trying to gain, it's clearly there's something about power here. He's at least able to speak it. It feels like it's either Longshanks who's teetering on comic book evil.
Pretty one-dimensional. Yeah.
Pretty one-dimensional. Every time the other Scottish nobles betray, it's always like, well, we just got offered a better deal. And you can kind of get the sympathy of like, oh, well, we're just going to lose to the English anyway. Why not get something out of it? Bruce Sr. is where I was like thinking again, like, oh, this is like, if this was Game of Thrones, he would be like a main character. He'd be flipped in terms of screen time with like William Wallace or something like that. It'd be all about him and the political machinations or something like that.
I really like this bit of dialogue that he says to his son. Talk about the leper, what he says to the Bruce, because he very reasonably explains to him, quote, "You admire this man, William Wallace. Uncompromising men are easy to admire. He has courage, so does a dog. But it is exactly the ability to compromise that makes a man noble," end quote. And that's why you can't totally dislike him, because you understand, to your point, Nathan, why he's doing what he's doing. He's like, you can't just rush in with a sword to battle every single time. It's not going to work.
Right. And I think that's where I'll say this is a great plot. This is a great thing where I think the movie early on is maybe building for a contrast, and kind of like, because there's okay, that ability to compromise makes a man noble, because we kind of talked about early on there's this discussion about like wits are what make men or something like that. I forget the quote, but like that's a theme coming from Wallace's family. And then you've also got this ability to compromise is what makes men noble. I think Wallace says something later on about nobility, what makes nobility or something to the Bruce. And I think you have these things kind of swimming around, right? And you get to see Robert the Bruce's character, the one who's actually having to work through them and work through that complexity.
I think that's the stuff that elevates this just above your epic action movie, right? It's these kinds of scenes with these characters. As awesome as the battle sequences are, and they are, this movie would not be what it is without this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's where it stands out. And I do wish the film had a little bit more of that dialogue. I think it does a great job of exploring it through the Bruce's character. You can kind of see it through him. And maybe you don't need the dialogue for it, but I think there's a lot of good work done there. And it's like I wouldn't mind maybe a little bit more, but maybe that's where that 4-hour cut has an extra like 15 minutes of dialogue.
You should write into Mel Gibson and ask for it.
Yeah. I should start a letter campaign, a petition.com.
That actor does a good job with that. His name is Ian Bannon. He was a very well respected and like long working English character actor. I'm just gonna shout it out because the film did win Best Makeup. It is really convincing makeup for his character. It gets progressively worse throughout the film, if you notice.
Sure. Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Well, because they also like reveal more of it later on.
Yeah.
I think very last scene is when he has the most like doesn't have a hood on, and you really see the bandages and stuff like that. And that's really like, man, we're seeing it.
Sophie Marceau, future Bond girl, Anton, she's in this as the Queen. She's great. Doesn't get a ton of screen time, but very, very memorable role. And it's probably her most famous role, I would say.
Yeah, and well written into the story structure and how it kind of weaves into the drama of it all.
Then our guy, Brian Cox.
The man.
What is he on screen? 5 minutes?
But still very impactful.
Possibly the most important character in the film, though, because everything he teaches young William resonates throughout.
Yeah.
And it's a great example of the writing, right? All the lessons and the training that he gives to William, it resurfaces at multiple points in the film. I like that line, too, that William says to Murren, which is the same thing that Argyle says to him. Well, we'll have to remedy that situation. It's good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it really sets up from that just that couple, as you said, 5 minutes, really sets up what is being imparted to William that he's going to bring back as he now kind of returns to Scotland and ends up leading this like rebellion, right? You know, kind of where the ingenuity, right? The wit, right? Is like kind of he uses his head before he uses his sword kind of thing. So
any other shouts on the cast, Anton? Some well-known faces for sure. You mentioned Brendan Gleeson.
Gleeson is a treasure. Love seeing him get featured in the 90s.
There was the guy whose wife gets prima nocted. Is that a verb?
Tommy Flanagan. He's in Gladiator.
Yeah, he's got a memorable face.
He does. Yeah, he plays the cab driver in the game, Anton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. He's not on the... Is he not... You said Tommy...
His name's Tommy Flanagan, I believe.
He's not even on the Wikipedia page for cast or something like that. I'd have to go to IMDb.
James Cosmo, remember him from Troy? He's in this as Brendan Gleeson's father.
Yeah.
David O'Hara plays the mad Irishman, Stephen. It's a pretty well-known face. And I guess some of the guys that play the nobles I've seen before. I think some of the English characters I've seen, in other films. There's just known faces here and there. Catherine McCormick as Murren, she's great, especially with what she's asked to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the last section I have before I think we can wrap this up. This is obviously a new section given the type of film that we're covering today. Should this have won Best Picture? Here are the other nominees that year. Apollo 13, Babe, Il Postino, and Sense and Sensibility.
Having only seen half of those, and I haven't seen Babe in 25 years or whatever, I would want to rewatch Apollo 13. I remembered that's the only one that maybe is sniffing this film. Maybe.
I'm going to stand by this same perspective of it's really not the Academy Awards nominees aren't necessarily about an objective like what's the best movie. It's about what movie campaigned the best and hit the right check boxes for how the Academy wants to reward that particular studio. Even if there is a more of a preference for one of these films objectively for how it was directed, how it was acted, which Pig was actually the best actor of the year. It really is a bit of preference when it comes to the Academy, and I do still find it impressive despite that this film won. I don't think it was the best film of the year, but I do think like there probably was a bit of campaigning behind the scenes for it to win.
Of those 5 nominees, though, what do you think should have won?
I probably would have given it to Apollo 13.
You think it's better than this?
To me, it's a classic.
That's
I
not
love
what
that
I asked.
Yeah.
I think it's a classic too.
No.
Is it better than Braveheart? I don't know.
No, I don't think so. But
like we talked about with Out of Africa, Anton, I mean, you're right about the whole campaigning thing. And the 2 best films of 1995, in my opinion, were not even nominated. That would be Heat and Toy Story.
okay, that's a lot of disrespect to Billy Madison.
I like Billy Madison fine.
It's that 1990. That's
He got no
1995.
nominations at all. None. 0.
Which is wild. That is nuts.
That's
And
the
a really
best film
good
of
point.
1995. I don't think that's a
I mean,
hyperbolic statement.
I think Toy Story probably is one of the most important films of all time.
Well, yeah.
Sure. Like that's kind of amazing. Really, really good call. But again, like it's just, if the category we're talking about is like worst best picture winners, I wouldn't take this award away from the film. Like
No,
it
I
hit
wouldn't
enough
either.
points. It won, you know?
Would you say this film has become underrated at this point?
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
I think what I would say is I think I used to hear a lot more about this film. I think it got talked about a lot more or was referenced a lot more. And I think it's maybe lost a little bit of its cultural, like, kind of, I don't want to say significance, but like how much it appears. And I'm not sure if I would translate that directly to, is the film underrated? But I know something we didn't talk about a lot because it's maybe harder to discern. It's not like a big like sci-fi movie or something, but I think I remembered like that there was a lot of like a lot of Braveheart, like after the movie came out, like there was a lot of like, yeah, Braveheart that I think has kind of fallen off. And I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to think about maybe why the film gets underrated or gets not as talked about or thought about as much.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's probably talked about the same with folks our age, but I think a younger generation, it doesn't resonate with them as much. Maybe if they saw it,
Sure.
like Gladiator's a little newer than this film, but still 25 years old at this point, I think. And obviously it just had a sequel that came out recently, so it has that going for it. But Gladiator to me always felt like it stayed more in the cultural zeitgeist than this ad. A little bit.
Now, got a question. Do you think, is Gladiator a better movie than this movie?
I think Gladiator is an easier watch than this film. I don't know if it's necessarily a better film. Gladiator is one of my favorite films. I think this might be too, but I find Gladiator, I think, more entertaining.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was thinking I can watch Gladiator more frequently than this.
Yeah.
And that probably helps with that enduring kind of
Oh, yeah.
legacy, right? Is just that it's kind of more, entertaining, more watchable. This isn't unwatchable. Obviously, this is an entertaining movie in many ways, but yeah. Okay.
Well, it's kind of like, this could be a whole nother discussion, but like Godfather 1 and 2, like what's better, right? I think probably the second one's a better film, but I think the first one is a little more entertaining. To take nothing away from Godfather 2.
I was going to say, I don't know, the parts with De Niro in Godfather 2 are insanely entertaining.
I'm just thinking about like the horse's head in the bed, like all that stuff. You know what I mean? I feel like, I'm not saying it has nothing to do with quality.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's just like, I feel like you can kind of like look at both and be like, objectively of two films, these are two fantastic and amazing films, entertaining in their own qualities.
Right.
It's almost too hard to compare.
I think Godfather 1's a little shorter too. It has that going for it. Like this is I think 30 minutes longer than Gladiator, so that you have that piece of it too. I don't know where I'm going with this, but to answer your question, it's like, is Gladiator better than this? I think it's more rewatch?
Got it.
It's a good question.
Just because it's been mentioned so much. We've talked more about Gladiator than like The Patriot, which might have more connective tissue to this film than Gladiator, but we've been I don't know. I've not seen The Patriot in a very, very
I haven't
long
seen it in
time.
a long time either.
I just
It's a
assume
lot
it is.
easier than this.
Okay.
It's got some gorgonzola, Anton. If you think the villain is one-dimensional in this film, the Patriot is like a cartoon character. He starts off, if you remember, his first introduction to this character, he shoots Mel Gibson's teenage son in the back and murders him.
Yeah,
And then says, "Stupid boy."
that one was not a good film.
The Patriot?
Yeah.
You know we're covering that.
Yeah.
Underrated John Williams score, though.
Talk about Oscar bait.
Yeah, they were going for that there. Okay, anything to add? I think we can wrap this up, if not.
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
Let's wrap it out.
So,
Backwards hats, flip the chair. Let's wrap it out.
all right. Nathan, would you like to wrap it out first?
You know, I've been taking the first wrap out so often. I want to turn it over to you guys, and maybe I'll
Flipping it on us,
close it
okay.
out. Yeah, I'm flipping it on it unexpectedly.
All right, Anton, whose
Yeah,
turn
he's-
is it?
I'm happy to go first, and Nathan, of course, will grant your request. You're so handsome. I can't say no.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's clear why there is a bit of controversy when Mel Gibson is brought up, and a lot of scrutiny on his films, even more intensified and under the magnifying glass because of his history. Now, considering that, it's almost just baffling how much of a home run, how much of a grand slam he had with this film. So successful in the awards received in from the Academy, and at the same time, you can clearly see on screen why it really did deserve to win. You talked about the score, the very strong and lean cast, not considering the 1,600 extras, but I feel like there is so many great qualities in this about just proper balance, storytelling, and just, again, care and attention that if you're telling me like this dude did this for his big budget directorial debut, like that's amazing. And I feel like, having said that as well, it has such a timelessness to it. Like, it was a story set hundreds of years ago, but I think that what separates this film from other films that kind of fit this same mold is just its ability to really connect deeply, and really understanding human emotions and being able to just really attach to that. So I think that this movie is a bit underrated today. I think that we already talked about how much this influences a lot of action today, but even when you think of just proper storytelling, or just even when you just think of just really strong characters and just the impact of this film, this is a standout film. I think that it deserves a lot more recognition, and I think that it's being harshly viewed, but I think that it deserves a ton of credit for what it's accomplished. You know, kilts up boys. It's an A.
Historical inaccuracies aside, I think this is a masterpiece. The directing, the acting, the storytelling, the scenery, there are few films that can come close to this. I think despite the faults of the inaccuracies that we talked about, it succeeds for me just because of how emotionally captivating it is. I had forgotten how hard this film hits emotionally. There's some gut punches in this film. Gibson's acting and directing talents are really on full display here. The set pieces are phenomenally well filmed and executed. The cinematography as a whole, it just makes this movie wonderful to look at. And then the score by James Horner, it's one of the finest ever composed for cinema. It's a technical and emotional marvel, this film. Was it the best film of 1995? No. But I think based on the nominees, it deserved its Best Picture win. So I gave The Last Samurai an A+, Anton. So I think that's what I have to give this. A+. I think the thing that really sold it for me the most was how well paced I found it to be, despite it being 3 hours. And I watched this in one sitting. I did not look at my watch once. And that was the cherry on top for me. So yeah, A+.
Very nice.
All right, then I'll round it out. Yeah, I can say I think this film is very well done. I think it has fantastic, as we said, cinematography, sound design, scoring, incredible. And I think that, and directing, of course, I think Gibson really just does a standout job, and there's so much there that comes together. Overall, I think all of that just makes it really enjoyable. I agree, Patrick, like it doesn't feel like 3 hours. That's really hard to do when you've got a big movie like this and it goes that long. I think for me, there is just a little bit, as I kind of mentioned earlier, I think there's a little bit more I would have liked to have seen from Gibson's performance. There's a couple spots that are just a little bit take me out of it a little bit, and I know we didn't get to fully invest in those, but that's why for me I think this is a great movie, but I'm going to be just under Anton at an A-, and some of that has to do with that, not Gibson's controversy, but his I think it's an incredibly hard thing to act and direct in your own movie. So I give him props for that. But I think there's also a reason that he's not in the nomination for Best Actor for this film. So, and that's kind of where it just gets a little bit of a ding for me. Everything else, just outstanding.
Very fair. Well, that's it for Braveheart.
That's it.
That is
Look at that.
Man,
Yeah. Nathan, great having you on again.
Oh, fantastic to be here. Good to see you guys.
it's very good to
Always
see
good
you.
to see
And
you.
man, always enjoy having you on. Can't wait for the next episode.
Absolutely.
Next week's episode, Anton, is going to be Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Okay.
We've already recorded
Fun.
that one.
Exciting. The
With Count
Tim-
Dooku.
See my point, Anton?
Yep, everyone.
the Tim Burton one.
Well, because Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is the Gene Wilder one. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is the
They have different names. Everyone confuses the two despite them having different names because the book is called Charlie and the Chocolate
Charlie and the
Factory.
Chocolate Factory.
Surprised by
Not
that fact.
Not at all.
No.
We talked about it on the recording, how like everyone was like, which one? But yeah, so that'll be next week's
Is
episode.
that true?
Nathan, great having you on.
Fantastic to be here, guys.
Well,
Hope you all have a great holiday. Merry Christmas.
thank you. This
Thank you.
episode will be coming out months afterwards, but whatever.
Well, whatever year. You know what?
you
If
have a
someone
Merry
listens to
Christmas
it,
too.
you know what?
Yeah,
If
Merry
someone
Christmas
listens,
to you.
you don't know when someone's going to be listening to this.
That's a good
It
point.
may come out at a certain point. They may want to hear Merry Christmas to all the listeners. You know
Merry
what? Just-
Christmas to everyone listening in
Yeah.
December 2028.
Right.
Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely. Yeah. Shout outs to 2028. Wonder
Right.
what life will be like.
We'll be fine.
We'll be fine. It'll be great.
You want to read the outro to this, Anton? Since we have to read it to make it easier now?
Yes,
I can read it. It's fine.
please go ahead.
You're like, I closed that tab.
Yeah.
If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a follow and a 5-star review. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel as well. As always, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. For those who would like to support us directly, we have a Patreon. Links are in the description. Thanks for listening and see you next time.